talking about. Yeah, I think part of the thing for me has been, if you believe in the thesis, and if you're as all in as you're going to be, and if you have a fairly good idea of what's on the horizon, then it's almost hard for all the noise to even be relevant, like for it to register, because of relevance to a degree is like things that make certain actions consequential, or things that inspire certain actions, right? And so all the craziness that's going on, and all the constant talk about the CPI print and the macro and the interest rates and the all this stuff, like I told you before we started, I appreciate that many of us are in different circumstances, and some we're in our closer proximity to these issues and some are further away, and that dictates how relevant they are. But it all just it increasingly irrelevant, which I love, because what it's doing is just narrowing my focus tremendously on the things that are seemingly still relevant and increasingly relevant, and all the noise is just, whereas before I think I, for whatever reason, engaged in it too much, like hooked into the Twitter feed all the time, and just, because it's like a freak show, right? So even though it's not that relevant to you, like you want to watch it. Now, for whatever reason, it seems to be way easier to just push all that out and focus on the things that are relevant and meaningful. And among other things, that's just meant spending a lot less time on Twitter. So,
Yeah, no, I totally echo that. I mean, I think when we had the big plunge, from wherever we were, mid 40s or whatever, I remember tweeting out, I'm like, well, this is the first time I've wanted to be on Twitter in a while, just because, I don't know, the pleb in me that wanted to, I don't know, throw out some hold tweets basically. But that was the first time in a while that, there was a part of me wanted to be on the feed. But so I totally echo that. And I think why, I mean, if I hazard a guess as to to explain that, it's like once your personal barometer of value, it gets honed, then I don't know. It's like I start to feel like my life is mine, and the outside is like, the outside is going to do what it's going to do, and I got to engage with it to a degree. But mostly I start to feel agency, a kind of agency that allows me to feel good about what I'm doing, because it's my choices and my time. And so I think that's a really good sign.
And I think, speaking in broad brushstrokes here, there's a lot of nuance, but treating all the clown world noise as it should be treated, in my view, which is as irrelevant or at least uninteresting, and focusing and amplifying on the things that are relevant and are interesting and that are contributing to, this emerging culture and world that I think a lot of us share, again, broadly speaking, just seems to be the right approach. And like, to use a very simple recent example, and I don't really give a fuck one way or the other, but like the CPI number, how's that? Like, I don't feel the need to comment or look, or like, that's totally irrelevant to me. It doesn't change any of my allocation or anything like that. I mean, it's just part of the show, and so it's like, I don't know what it's been. I guess in the past I've struggled to like not pay attention to things that are not super relevant. And for whatever, and I think, let's be real, bear markets tend to do this anyways, because that like constant dopamine rush of all-time highs is not there to like just suck you in, and that aspect of things, and it's becomes a little bit more subdued perhaps, and you can focus on things that, well, you're not drawn away as much, and so you can focus on other things. But I think also it's just that ongoing process of continuing to dial in your lifestyle around the things that you think are most valuable and meaningful, all the way from workout and diet and routine, and like being more disciplined with how you allocate your time, and making sure that like when it's time to do this thing, you're doing that thing. And it waxes and wanes based on life circumstances and stuff, for sure. But yeah, the focus just continues to narrow and become clearer and clearer, which is great, because it means more productivity and more enjoyment of the things that you do, and more like you believe more in the things that you're spending your time in. And that generates a certain satisfaction as well. So I hope this trend continues, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, there's something about like the analogy sort of that pops is like, the meme of like, there's no counterparty risk, and there's
Right.
no,
So you don't got to worry about anybody else.
yeah, it's like there's no counterparty in your life that you're kind of like, heavily balancing or something, something to that tune. And that's again, another one of those features. I mean, I guess when I think about that, it's like my relationship to, Bitcoin, the Bitcoin protocol. Like, I first stumbled into in sort of stumbled onto it in like late 2016, and then more so sort of early 2017, and was, basically addicted. I've been addicted for years, like learning about it, talking about it, obsessing. And now, I don't know the technicals the way that a lot of guys do, but, I've gotten better at it. I don't know the under the hood nearly the way that some people do, but I've gotten a little better at it. But my relationship to that, has calm, like for the most part, I feel good about the direction post 217, post fork wars, you know, and so that's kind of what's brought me calm, because, I'm all in. So, yeah, my relationship to the other things now in life that often toss and turn people around, it's just not as important, And so, yeah, it just frees up this, and that's not, it's not necessarily even that easy of a thing necessarily, because, I have my sort of pre Bitcoin life, and I have my post Bitcoin life. And now I have, in some ways, more questions, like, yeah, I look at my life and I'm like, okay, this is where I'm at, and what's next for me now? Now that I continue to recalibrate and sense things that, even more so, what's meaningful to me, and that's just sort of the mantra. It's like the openings are coming. It's almost like the questions are coming. The open spaces are coming, and for me personally, I gotta look at, like, yeah, now what is my contribution going to be? Like, in some ways, some of the things that preoccupied me, and, let's be really honest about it. For me, it was like, I became, sort of 215, 216. I'm like, I never really was about money. And then I was like, money's the thing. I got to know what this is, And then when I finally did go down the rabbit hole and learned a bunch of stuff, and now I'm more at ease about money. So now I'm, I keep asking myself, now what's next? Like, I got a sense of it, but what is my contribution going to be? And, it's a wonderful question to have. And it's a little daunting too. It's like the calibration is continuing.
Yeah. Your mic is popping a little bit. Can you turn down the gain a tiny bit?
Yeah, sure.
Step back a little bit.
Yeah, I'll turn it down.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the irony of all this, right? Like what you just said, you were like, since being all in, like, I'm at peace, that all in Zen. Whereas, traditionally speaking, you would think, like, if all your eggs are in one basket, if you're so tied to the outcome of one particular thing, you'd be like losing sleep over it, or you'd be stressed to the nines. But like in this particular case, both because of the asset and because of, our makeups, perhaps, being all in elicits a sense of calm and peace. It's like, it's a really phenomenal, interesting thing. But, what you were saying, again, I don't know how much of this I'm shading with my own, with what's happening with me internally, but I do get the sense with, like, a lot of people I'm interacting with in the space and observing, that I think a lot of people may feel the way that you just described, where it's like, you always want to keep up to date on things that you don't know about the area of your interest. But again, like, to your point about knowing how Bitcoin works, like, intimately under the hood, how relevant is that for your aims and for your goals. Like, well, your action will probably dictate how relevant it is. So whatever degree of, technological understanding you have about this system, that's probably sufficient for you. But I think the broader issue is that I think people are starting to realize, at least if you've been in for a while, that Bitcoin is a means, not an end. And we're starting to give greater consideration and be like, well, what is the end? Again, this is not over yet. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Nothing is guaranteed, all the normal disclaimers. But, people are starting, you feel that sense of freedom. You feel that sense of calm. You're increasingly freeing yourself from the shackles of the fiat world, whether that be a fiat job or just the considerations that had to go with a life that was more where all of those issues were more relevant prior, and they're becoming less and less so. And it, like, this kind of new perception is dawning, and it's begging the question, like, oh, so what is the end for which Bitcoin is the means? What should I be striving for here? What type of life am I trying to create? What should be the things that are most valuable to me that I want to accumulate or experience or orient myself by? And, this has been the bulk of my interest, and the written work that I'm currently working on is all about that. Because for me, it's like, that's kind of the only relevant thing, at least, not the only relevant thing, but this where my interest is naturally going as a result of, what I just said being largely the case for me. And that's the part where everything gets reconstituted, right? That's the part where, like, if you're going to make those determinations, you kind of got to reassess the entire world with this new perception or frame of reference, so that you can use your understanding of that world to make those determinations, or to make those decisions, or at least to investigate them with as much clarity as possible. And that's the really exciting part, because, and I know a lot of us feel this way, there's just like this intellectual explosion, explosion or something. Like, there's just so much to be discovered and learned now. And, like, it's bizarre. And this is just a small example. Again, part of this exploration is, like, talking about relevance, right? But I'm about to somewhat contradict myself by saying, like, now I find myself exploring topics and subjects that I hadn't previously been interested in, just to see if with this new sort of frame of reference or perspective, they are interesting, And so I'm like, I started studying physics just because it's like, I want to know how that shit works. Like, that's interesting to me, in tandem with studying, whatever economics and philosophy and, history and all this kind of stuff, so that you can, because the better understanding you have of the world, obviously the better position you're in to figure out the line that you want to pursue through it all. And I don't know, it seems like many are kind of finding themselves in that position, and it's incredibly, again, once again, privileged, but also just really enjoyable. Like, it's like every day there's nothing but things to do and discover, and there's certainly no boredom in my life. I guess is the one way of putting it.
Yeah, for sure. The air is cleaner,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I mean, what you said really reminded me of, is that good? The mic, is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminded me of, a thought experiment I used to do, I guess when I was a little bit younger. I just sort of remembered it now, but it was this thing of, like, I would ask myself, okay, what do I want? Like, what do I want? And then I would imagine getting it. And then I'd be like, okay, then what? What do I want? And I imagine getting it. And I imagine getting it. And then what happens if I just keep getting what I want over and then what? Like, if you really exhaust that list to, like, because we all sort of, I think, have this, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a common human experience of, like, my life will happen, or, it will happen at some point, but it's not now, or something like that. I don't know. There's a human element, I guess, maybe to the experience of time. And so to go through this experiment of, like, well, yeah, what if all those things that I think that are ahead for me, or that I want, or what if I get them all, then what the fuck am I going to do? Like, if desire, in a way, if desire was to be fulfilled, I mean, would there just be another desire? I don't know. Yeah. So that I think that sort of can help maybe clarify, like, what is really meaningful to me? You know, if all the things that I think I want, suddenly I get, then what? Anyways, that's what it reminded me of when you said that. There was something else, but
I think this is, Bitcoin is going to put a lot of us in that position. You know, like if we're right about this and Bitcoin continues to succeed and more people are kind of have a greater foundational financial security, let's say, so they can be more, they can have more choices in how they commit their time or what they pursue or what they have to submit themselves to. More and more people are going to be confronted with that very thought exercise, which is like, okay, you got, because so many of us, I mean, so few people get to do that because the necessities of daily life and deprivation and to a certain degree, like inculcated ambitions that perhaps aren't necessarily consciously derived or determined, force us to not even have to confront those, right? Because, oh, I got to climb this ladder, I got to be on this path, I got to feed my family, you know, all those things remove one from that type of a thought exercise or considerations. But it seems like Bitcoin is bringing more and more people back to it. And it seems to me that that's kind of why there's a growing interest in, you know, the, for lack of a better term, philosophical or even theological aspects of this Bitcoin phenomenon, this emergent culture, because it's inevitable that you wind up there. Because if Bitcoin is freedom money and it actually grants you freedom, well, then, you know, you're just standing in freedom saying which direction. And those pursuits, those enterprises of philosophy and theology and religion, I think historically have been the ones that answer your question, which is once you get what you want and get what you want and get what you want and get, like, what's at the end or what should be at the end of that type of pursuit. And it's probably not just a different colored Lambo, right? That doesn't seem to instill a long-term sense of fulfillment or meaning. But these other domains seem to be wrestling with those questions. And again, what do you know? There seems to be like a massive hunger for discussions around them in this space, or at least, again, I self-select for that, but I seem to be observing it.
Yeah, no, I totally concur on that. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it leads us to the, again, you know, I mean, even calling it a privilege is like, yeah, okay, yeah, it is a privilege, or it's our fucking design, you know, that this is, you know, what is human, what is possible, you know, that humans can feel potential, true potential, and that they can be drawn to something, you know. Yeah, and so hopefully, you know, that's where we're headed for everyone, you know, that it's not just a privileged few, but, you know, that when given, or I don't know, given, granted, I don't know, achieve that place of like, I have freedom to choose, I have freedom to decide, I can listen to what gives me the tingles, you know. You're reading physics, who knows, you know, you start diving into physics and suddenly you get the tingles about something, you get drawn to something like that's, you know, I guess my idealistic self, you know, the idealism in me is like, every human deserves that. Every human deserves this thing of like the space to, you know, feel what's really true for them, and then hopefully be able to follow it.
Yeah, you know, I agree. Deserves, just like privilege is a funny word and carries a lot of baggage itself, you know, because in many cases you could flip this on its head and just say it's the incremental benefits of taking more and more and more responsibility for oneself, right? And so in establishing, you know, freedom of various kinds, that's the other side of that, is taking responsibility and making the sacrifices, the requisite sacrifices to take that responsibility. And then, you know, like, again, you follow that path up far enough and it's like, well, what's the greatest sacrifice I can make for the greatest responsibility I can take to experience the greatest amount of meaning, right? And we're right back into theological narrative and stuff like that. And but this seems, all roads seem to converge in that sort of way, again, at least for me. And I think this is why we talk about, and why people get the sense that like a renaissance is probably, you know, a type of renaissance is probably going to be the outcome of this phenomenon succeeding, because this is the type of reframing of perspective and ambition and aspiration and all that kind of stuff that this seems to be producing in people. And these are the sorts of questions that it seems to be producing in people. And how can you not have a renaissance of a certain kind when that happens, especially given the era and the socio-cultural situation that it's coming out of, that I think, which is funny because I think a lot of us in Bitcoin land are extremely critical of it. And this is why we refer to it as clown world and why it seems so much like that. But again, to so many people, we're, at the height of civilization and things have never been better and more modern. And if we can just all avoid dying of some ridiculous virus, then, we keep going in this awesome direction we've been going in. And I think more and more people all the time, and some as a result of engaging and attempting to understand Bitcoin, are beginning to realize that it's probably not going to be on the same trajectory. We're probably not going to value the same things. We're probably not going to aspire for the same things as individuals and as, a society or a culture or a collective. And a lot of things are going to change, but you wouldn't use the word renaissance if you didn't think those changes were going to be good. Mm. And I don't know. And all of us doing this, right? Wrestling with these ideas and reorienting our behavior accordingly is what creates that. It's not like you sit back and it happens. It's because millions of people end up having these thoughts, end up taking more responsibility, end up pursuing different reframing value for themselves and pursuing them, end up using different means to achieve them. All that stuff taken together emergently produces something akin to a renaissance. And I certainly, if things keep going in this direction, we don't, annihilate ourselves beforehand. I think that's probably what's going to happen in hindsight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I listen to you and Gigi all the time, and Gigi says this thing about how Bitcoin burned off so much of himself, and it reminds me of like the question of what is money, like that the Bitcoin rabbit hole, the money rabbit hole is like, it is a kind of rite of passage, and I think there is a kind of pain involved in a way. Yeah. And what you said just reminded me of that. It's like the pain of, well, I guess just pain in general, like the clown world, make no mistake, like clown world is just like rife with pain. That's my take on it. It comes out as this whatever expression, but really it's just, there's so much pain, and, the pain it is going to transform things, on an individual level. I think it's very, it is the thing. And then on a bigger level,
yeah. It should come as no surprise that a reassessment of oneself is taking place here, or like a former self is being burnt off, or whatever. Because like when you think about how your conception of yourself is even constituted, how you arrive at it, I mean, it's years of information exchange, feedback, signal accumulation of the culture that you're in, right? And just this constant back and forth of you defining yourself in relation to or in contrast to those things. Mm-hmm. And if we're asserting here that thing that we are in relation to is very much determined by the value exchange layer that sits at the bottom of it, and the institutions and forms of governance that stem out of that, and that now an alternative or an upgrade to that is emerging, that is a dramatic departure from the prior one, then we should expect that the emerging landscape being built on top of that will constitute a far different environment or thing against which we are contrasting ourselves than the prior one. And as a result of that, we're going to see ourselves differently. We're going to understand ourselves differently. We're going to reconstitute ourselves in relation to that new environment versus the old. And so like, it just seems it would be weird if there wasn't like a sense of a pre and post, or like a fiat self or a former burnt off self or mm-hmm. a pre and post Bitcoin self. It would be weird if that wasn't the case for those who really, they don't just hold it as part of a diversified portfolio, but they kind of see its grander implications.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and in that realm, I'm just I'm reflecting, on myself, and I'm like, it's like I had, it's almost like it's almost like I was waiting, not that I was waiting for Bitcoin, but it's like I was living Bitcoin, but I was broke, you know? Um, and I didn't know what it was until, whenever I found it. But I guess I feel lucky that I stumbled into, the place in my life where I was like, oh, value, I started to sense value for myself and meaningfulness for myself. And then Bitcoin emerged, and it was just like, the fit was just so, it just fit. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah. And so, I mean, one of my more recent rabbit holes, I don't know if you know this, but I feel like a new dad, but she's now 4.5, my little one. But this idea of this thing of parenting, this experience of parenting, and yeah, I mean, until you're you're not a parent, right, John?
No,
No, yeah.
not yet.
Yeah, when it happens, it's like, I don't know. Maybe it points to back to this, broader, I guess, take that I have, that it's experience, that experience is the thing. And we've had a couple of conversations about, the divine, and this thread, this thing of like, what is this underlying thing, and I really subscribe to this take that it's like experiential, that the divine can only be, that meaning, that value can only be experienced, and that each person has to have their own experience of it, I guess. And how am I tying this back to parenting? One of my new rabbit holes, maybe, I don't know, is just early childhood development. And how, from the stuff I've learned and studied, and now I'm implementing and experiencing for myself, but also observing other parents and everything else, and reading some cool stuff. I'm starting to move towards this idea that these early years for humans are much more impressionable than we think, and that in some ways maybe they're the key, and maybe they're going to be maybe those things are going to be one of the major shifts as this renaissance emerges, is our look at, our focus upon, early humans. Because I think there's a vital sort of chunk of time there, and that sort of sets in motion that human being, maybe for forever. And now that I've, been a parent, and she's 4.5 now, it's like, yeah, thanks to Bitcoin, like I've been mostly like a professional dad, like for
Right.
for 4.5 years. And I mean, I'm so grateful for that. Like,
That's awesome.
I have that, I've had that time, and it's the beginning of something, obviously, but that time is like, yeah, it's just hard to describe. And it ties back to, our previous conversation, I think, or topic of like freedom, choice, feeling sovereign, agency, or whatever. Because, and maybe this is a kernel at the heart of like these questions that you keep asking and these conversations you keep having, which is like, we're born. It's wild. We'll cosmic stuff, but we're born, into this world, and we are ultimately dependent. Like, I was there with my wife the whole time. It's like 2 days of labor. It's like the adrenaline, and and then this little thing comes out, and it's just like, there's no words can describe and then the adrenaline settles after like a week, and I'm like, oh, this kid's not a rental. It's like I'm a parent now. but you know, we come out as humans like ultimately dependent, and you know, little humans don't survive unless, you know, they're just ultimately dependent. And I don't know if we've touched on this before in any of our combos, but this thing is like wired into us, which is like we look up and out, you know, for someone to, we depend on them for our survival when we're little, like really little. And you know, little kids are, unless they've experienced some kind of, you know, intense experience that has altered their ability to navigate, you know, they're enormously talented. They can adapt, adjust to anything. You know, we humans can pretty much adapt and adjust to anything, as we're seeing. Like we're 2.5 years into, like, no one would have predicted, and look how we've, you know, properly or improperly adapted to what's happened. And so where I'm going with this, I guess, is like, it's kind of part of our design to look up and out of us for our survival. In some ways it's woven into us, you know. And then I think it's the parenting or the caregivers or the, you know, then it's their place in the world to kind of support, but then reflect back, support, acknowledge, have attention, you know, have consciousness around the interaction with this human developing, and then somehow reflect back that at some point, and maybe it's over the course of many years, that human has to go, now it's me, you know, now it's mine. It's, I no longer have to look outwards to survive and to be dependent and look at someone bigger than me, authoritative, you know, my survival. And suddenly at some point, hopefully, it doesn't happen for everybody right now, I don't think, in our culture, but at some point, hopefully a human goes back in and goes, now it's my responsibility. It's no longer anybody else's. It's my time to. But that's a fascinating shift, because I do believe it's part of our makeup design. It's a feature that we have to look out and adapt. Otherwise, we don't make it. You know, it's the Darwinism at its best. You come out completely dependent. But then how does the shift happen? You know, how does the shift happen, you know, over the course of whatever years? Maybe for some people, it's like an abrupt thing, you know, so an abrupt experience, and suddenly. But yeah, that's some of the stuff I've been thinking about, especially as a parent now.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. And, you know, the whole starting completely and utterly dependent, and then perhaps at least one of the possible objectives to an individual's life or existence is freedom or liberation. And, you know, so you go from 100% dependence to even not being dependent on like psychological aspects of yourself, you know, this idea of like nirvana or liberation, where you experience, you know, the greatest sense of lack of well, this is the ego death idea too, right? Where you kind of, even notion of yourself dissolves, and you experience the highest form of liberation possible. And perhaps perhaps a beneficial way to approach life is to increasingly look at it in terms of how can I take more responsibility and therefore establish more freedom in my life. And then it goes back to the thing that we were discussing. Perhaps the whole point of seeking liberation is so that you can more consciously engage the very thing that determines the emergence, you know, the degree to which you contribute to the emergence of either good on the far end of the good side of the spectrum and evil on the far side of that spectrum. Right now, like every act will fall most likely not on the extremes of those, but like, you know, that's kind of the idea of the logos, right? Like it's your divine ability to determine what type of creator you're going to be as a agent, as a force in the world. And if you don't have freedom, if you're not completely in control of making those choices for yourself, then you are the agent of someone else's will, right? You're being swayed or influenced or forced to become a force or a something which creates in the world that is not using their own judgment, their own rationale, their own logos to determine what that should be. And it's being co-opted by another. And in some sense, like what could be worse than that, of giving, that giving away your most fundamental divine right, as it were. And so, early childhood development is something that I've always been super interested in as well. Haven't put, theory into practice quite yet, but I hope to do so soon. And yeah, I mean, it's how do you do that properly? And what's interesting is, I think I even mentioned this to you in one of our prior conversations, but when I read the book, it's right in front of me, so I should know the title, The Origins and History of Consciousness. Did I tell you about that one? I'm sure I did.
Yeah. We haven't really talked about it. No, I read it as well. We were almost going to collide on it, but I love that book.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the thesis that he represents there, which Jung, I think, did to a certain degree, and Peterson expands on, is that like a lot of this cultural iconography, symbolism, narrative that's emerged since time, the beginning of time, has basically been an external representation of the psychological drama that plays out from a person coming into the world and being completely dependent in every conceivable way on the person that brought them into the world. And then over the course of time and in different stages of their life, detaching in the most optimal way possible from those dependencies until they become a fully realized or actualized individual self. And they're not subservient or subordinate to either, their biological progenitors, for example, or the psychological components that might otherwise influence them or bring them down or co-opt them or whatever. Like, and these stories are the process, again, properly, quote unquote, interpreted, not given a material interpretation. Our way is like the handing down of the wisdom and how to do that, of the wisdom of how to do that properly. And again, I mean, that's one interpretation. A lot of people will disagree with it, but, certainly reading this book was eye-opening to me, and it seems to make a lot of sense.
I mean, I think it's utterly brilliant. That is the journey of becoming free of nature and nurture. You know what I mean? Like that we become free of our nurture and our nature. And then we create like that is the human process. And there's no attainment, but there is that, I guess, journey. And it is difficult to talk about. It's difficult to describe, it is difficult to articulate, but there's something about becoming free from, our nature and our nurture, it's, that's so beautiful.
Among other things, this is part of the reason why in the future, if we make it, if we're on a Bitcoin standard, if we experience this type of renaissance that we always talk about, I suspect there will be far more intentional passing through the stages of life. So again, you have a kid, and as they grow up, like the demarcation points of their development will be far more explicit, and each one will be characterized by explicit experiences, explicit values and principles, so that we optimize the chances that they're able to engage in that process that's been explicated in myth and story throughout the ages in the most conscious and effective manner possible, such that it leads to them becoming, for lack of a better term, an optimized individual, who's taking the right amount of responsibility, who's able to establish the right amount of the maximal amount of freedom, and then who's in the greatest position possible to determine how they want to contribute to the unfolding process or manifestation of creation itself, right? I mean, it sounds, that last part's a little bit dramatic, but it is that, right? I mean, what else are you?
Yeah, no, it isn't. And I think what you're describing, I mean, for me anyways, in a nutshell, is like parenting. It's you're kind of describing parenting, which is, I mean,
no pressure.
No pressure, but also, no pressure, but also like, what an amazing, I mean, people always talk about it, right? I mean, I heard about it of friends. It is
sure.
really,
why'd you wait so long? Best thing ever, ineffable.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, I mean, yeah. My current take, I'm 4.5 years in, and not to get into too many details, but our little one wasn't the best sleeper, and I'm a very biological
Meticulous
person.
sleeper.
Yeah, so it was a big thing, and it was for my wife and I, um there's nothing else there's nothing else I've experienced in my life that is equally, like being a parent, okay, equally mundane and miraculous.
Mm.
Because like each day it's like these simple needs that must be met day after day after day, and it's like there's a mundaneness about it that's like, but at the same time it's just it's miraculous. So yeah, there's nothing else quite like it. I'm a bit of a tangent there, but like, um it's wild. It's a wild thing. But yeah, going back more so to this, yeah, this idea of like the early years. I think there's so much about it we don't know. I think there's just so much about it we don't know, and I think in the coming years it's going to be one of the primary things that people look at.
Yeah,
I know it's growing. I know it's a growing kind of intelligence, but I think it's going to be the thing that we look at as being, I guess, for lack of better description, sacred. And
totally.
yeah.
Totally. I mean, and again, amongst the phenomenon that I've been observing seems to be the case that someone who's able to establish, a certain degree of financial security through Bitcoin and other forms of freedom as a result of that, there's a lot of family starting going on. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
baby making happening. That seems to be an impulse.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, why wouldn't it be when you end up at being able to, jump off the hamster wheel and all the associated anxiety and stress, and you can look at your life and be like, well, what do I want it to be and what's meaningful? And it's not that surprising that, family and children would enter that picture because, perhaps there's nothing more meaningful. Um,
Yeah,
so
and
yeah,
no, I was just going to jump in, and I think the impulse, is the creative impulse. That once we, and it goes back to like what we're talking about. Once I get everything I want, or once I have the freedom, once I've attained my sovereignty, like I think what happens is we feel a creative impulse naturally that what we want to do is build something, create something, contribute. Like we want to make a contribution once we feel free. That's what I think. I don't think once you feel free, I don't think you just want to tag out and like disappear. I mean, maybe you want to disappear from what you had or what you were living before, but I think the creative impulse really emerges when we start to feel, yeah, that freedom.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, and to your point about just tagging out. I mean, in this, everyone's different, obviously. So there's going to be all sorts of different approaches to this stuff, but, you can appreciate that, people that maybe really lost themselves in the fiat world and then established some degree of freedom, maybe they're just like, I don't want the hassle. Like I'm too kind of tired from it all and I just want to check out. But, again, you can't avoid confronting the inevitable question about meaning and value in your life. Because if you just wind up on a beach sipping Mai Tais, at some point, you're probably going to look at yourself and be like, is this it? Is
Mm-hmm.
this what is most meaningful? And your
Mm-hmm.
actions are certainly going to signal or dictate to the people around you that what you value. And that's always the case. And that's the thing that nobody can avoid, which is such a juicy part about all this. Like nobody's hiding shit, like I'm not hiding anything, certainly anyone who's like, public in any capacity, because it's all on display. It's like, this is what you are, this is what you're pursuing, and everything that anyone needs to know about you is pretty much in there. Everyone's got some, personal things, of course, that they don't share, but like what we're motivated to do and the values and principles nestled within those actions and motivations for any, sort of person with any degree of discerning eye, it's like, it's all there. And, this actually is kind of relevant to the whole, like, Bitcoiners are judgmental and the cyber hornets are horrible sort of thing, because I think that like that's just an emerging recognition of that happening in a different way within a emerging culture. And sure, it's sometimes ugly and unnecessarily rough and all that kind of stuff, maybe because it's coming out of it's detaching itself from the former notions of politeness and correctness and stuff, and as a result it has to have that kind of edginess to it. Who knows? I mean, I'm sure it's a complex issue, but just to say that, like, there's an emerging, as a result of this freedom and as a result of people confronting these questions around value and meaning so much, their determinations are contributing to an emerging ethic that's coming up from the bottom of that. And some are vocal, some vocally express that ethic, even though themselves they're imperfect. And I think everyone would agree to that. But like, this is how it's coming through. And, sometimes I laugh at the people that, on the one hand, not laugh, but sometimes I wonder if people that both recognize that like a different form of morality will emerge as the environment or the details of the environment in which we construct ourselves, and as a result engage morality, as that changes, you would expect, and as it changes based on I think a base layer that we would say has a better morality or better ethics imbued into it, i.e., the kind of attributes of Bitcoin, most people would agree, like, yeah, that'll probably conjure up a better cultural ethic or signals that are better by which to constitute oneself with, but then criticize the initial form that it's taking and not be able to see through the veneer of the sort of Joker-esque veneer that is over top of that initially, and not be able to see maybe the mechanics that are working underneath. And maybe I'm wrong about all that, but that just seems to be the case for what I've been observing a lot in the people that are highly critical of, the toxicity and all that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're in the realm of, I mean, I think it's a complicated topic, but I think those are all valid, thoughts about it. I think, to tie it back to like parenting in a strange way, but like when you have something that you care about deeply, you're going to protect it. And that's not always going to be rational. And it's not always going to be, with couth, and with, like the way that Michael Saylor sort of talks about Bitcoin, and the way he quote unquote debates in the public space about it, there's just so much tact there, and he has such a facility for debate and language, right? But you can also feel that it does, at least that's my take so far, that it does mean a lot to him. Now, Twitter Anon with 8,000 subs, it might mean, like, Bitcoin might feel like his own fucking child, and he's going to defend it the best way that he knows how, which might be just vitriolic. But what I get from it is just like, it matters. It means so much. Yeah. Okay. Whatever. It's sometimes, the insults are like unnecessary. And that's maybe a broader, more of a broader conversation, I think, which I'd love to go into as well, which is about, just intensity and rage, and where do you put it in this world? What space have we made for, I'd say, particularly male intensity? Where's the space for it? So I think it comes out in unintended ways, but when you care about something deeply, fucking rights, man, like, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes in protecting that thing. You're not going to be thinking clearly at all times. You might be on tilt. You can see guys on Twitter when they go going back and forth, and then I'm like, well, that guy's on tilt. Like, he's firing on all cylinders, and he might not be aware. 24 hours later, he's like, oh, geez, what happened there? But no,
totally. I mean, people don't always speak the way that they would in hindsight think was best, or that was the best representation or reflection of both themselves and the idea that they were trying to get across, obviously. And agree with your remarks on Sailor. Sailor once told me like something akin to, don't win the argument, just win, and his life is probably a fairly decent reflection of that type of approach or philosophy. And, I think that's very wise. And I've considered it a lot, and it has changed to a certain degree how I interact, but nevertheless, I still appreciate when someone lets their, like the fullness of how they feel about something known, right? And they're not catering to a particular audience. They're not restraining their emotions about it. Like it's all just there on the table. I appreciate that too, and so I don't know, I don't have the answer about how and when to strike that balance, but there's a value in both, I guess. And so I appreciate that both are available. But
go ahead.
I was just going to say, to your point about intensity and rage, I mean, this goes back to the idea that I think as we move into a Bitcoin era, let's say, I think there will be a type of archaic revival where we look at the past and we look at different rites of passage and all that kind of stuff, and then we bring them back and we integrate them into, modern ideas around development and value and meaning and that kind of stuff. And hopefully we come up with something that's better than anything we've ever had, because this day and age, gym class is almost too like toxic masculine in certain schools, right? Where even that's being done away with, let alone like, wherever it was, like Sparta in, 600 BC, where when you turn 13, you go into the forest with a spear. And if you come out alive, then great, you're a part of the adult class. And if you don't, well, you never should have been, and so that's a pretty big divergence. And I think we're going to reintroduce some of those things in the most appropriate manner ever, and like recognize that we have certain elements of our nature and that we have certain elements of our psyche and our consciousness that, first of all, we want to be familiar with, we want to acquaint ourselves with, we want to not, reject or sweep under the rug. Like let's try to understand what they are. And then once we understand them, we have to say, all right, what's the best approach to take to restrain them and orient them towards the best use possible, or the best integration into our broader consciousness possible. And one of those things is definitely the propensity for all human beings, and maybe even all animals, but in relative within the human species, men more than women have this both capacity and impulse toward aggression, right? Especially on the extremes. Mm-hmm. And so what do you do about that? You certainly don't ignore it. You certainly don't try to like equalize everything. That just makes it worse, as again, Peterson is so often to point out. And I think you have to have rituals and practices in place that allow that aspect of ourselves to be explored, and then not restrained, like engaged in the proper way. Mm-hmm. And like, I don't know what that's going to be. An overly simplified example is like, guys got to get in like wrestling or something when you're a young kid, just to feel the physiological pain, the challenge, the grit, the interaction, like all that stuff. It doesn't mean you have to become a wrestler. It doesn't mean you have to be like a super masculine person. And, maybe that's not applicable for every single person, but just that there needs to be ways to recognize and address the components of ourselves and be able to restrain and point them in the right direction, whatever capacity or aspect of ourselves it is.
Yeah, no, I'm all about this. This has been like probably, in one form or another, like defined my life for the last like couple decades. And it's again, these broader sort of analogies, but like, it's like letting go of this idea, which is often a projection or of that someone from the top down should decide like how things should be, as opposed to from the bottom up, like what are the instincts? What are the instincts? What are the human things that are underneath that are running the show no matter what? So you might as well get to know what they are. You might as well explore them. You might as well, because they're going to do it no matter what. They're just going to do it in different ways, depending on how, how someone comes over the top. And it ties back to our thing of like early childhood development. It's like parents that can foster and make space for all the sort of human instincts that can come out of a child, depending on whatever, everything from the 9 months of them in the womb to what kind of a birth it was, to like just becoming a fucking human. Like no one knows anything about it. No one really knows what it engenders in us. So why not, make space for discovering that, fostering that. And when it comes to men, yeah, especially, I mean, I'm raising a daughter now, so sometimes I'm in uncharted water, and my wife is doing her thing, which is amazing. But I grew up with 3 brothers, there was 4 of us, and I grew up in a pack.
Wrestle.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's like, there's an essential, there's an essence, I think, to a lot of men that is like, that aggression is essential. It's not even something to like, it's essential. It's to be fostered. It's to be encouraged, so that it can be channeled. Like, it's life force. People like to judge things, everything from sexuality to rage to, violence. And I like to go first principles, get down there and go, that is fucking life force. If we start putting all these things on top of it, I mean, that life force is going to go somewhere. And often people who have, had their wrist slapped or their, put down upon, that energy is going to go somewhere. It often goes into self-destruction. It's got to go somewhere. So, yeah. And I think, sexuality is similar. It's like, there's a life force to it, that has to flow. If it doesn't flow, it's going to come through the side door, somehow. And it's going to be much worse than being able to, I guess, encourage it, embrace it. So
channel it properly.
Yeah.
That's, even in my own life, I remember, I was like 22 or 23. I was in China, and, I'd always been athletic and large enough that I didn't, in like normal peer environments in high school and all that kind of stuff, I always felt physically capable. But I always recognized that, like, not being able to, at least at a base level, take care of myself in combat was like, I felt the insecurity of that. Like, I was like, that's a vulnerability. And the what I have around that insecurity is just, I don't know how I'm going to react. Maybe I'll react in the completely wrong way. And so that would be bad. And also just having this latent insecurity I don't think is a good thing either. I want to flush that out. I want to make sure that that's being accounted for. And, that's when I started boxing and kickboxing, and at least, again, like, I'm no professional fighter or anything, but having a certain degree of competency there just to dial down the anxiety or insecurity around that aspect of life, right? And about, to your point, about that force of energy that's in you that can be applied to a variety of different things and must be applied to a variety of different things at certain times and places, not all of which are of your own choosing. So when you're placed in a circumstance that is unexpected, are you properly equipped to deal with it as best as possible? Now, the answer is probably no, not as best as possible, but are you able to deal with it in a manner that at least you have a chance of getting yourself through it, or, you err on the side of getting through it better than getting through it worse. And I agree with you, like this whole, and again, it's not all to blame with fiat, right? But broadly speaking, this fiat culture where we just try all those uncomfortable things, all those insecurities, all those things that we either don't want to or haven't spent the time to understand or learn how to deal with, they all get swept under the rug. And what do you get when you just have this intense burning, insecurity and rage and stuff like you were talking about? You get people going into a school and shooting up 20 kids, because they're completely incapable of channeling and understanding and engaging that energy properly. And they go and do these horrendous things either to themselves or to other people. And, and then of course the instrument that they do it with is what is blamed, rather than the motivation of why they engage in that behavior. And then by virtue of that, by not assessing why that happened properly, then you end up making the whole thing worse, because you end up trying to fix the wrong thing, and as a result making the entire circumstance worse.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the again, it's that top down thing, you know, people quote unquote in authority wanting to stay in authority and think that, and also know that there is a human, you know, there's a human, I call it like in a way, a fallibility to, like, if you don't come out of that, if you don't emerge from that design that is other people are going to take care of me, you know, then it stays with you. And there are people that know that and exploit that. That's for sure. We've seen it in a huge way in the last couple of years.
This is how the nanny state can be the nanny state, because there's so many people that need, or at least will accept, nannying, right? I mean, there's a lot of you know, middle-aged children out there, probably all of us to some degree, because we're products of this culture. And, you know, as much as we're trying to extricate ourselves from it and ascend or become a different version of ourselves in recognition of you know, how poor the signals that we've been receiving for our whole life and constructing ourselves are and were, it's still probably true in us to a certain degree. And I fully expect future generations to be less nannyable, right, and less desiring of a nanny, and less susceptible to just being willing. Someone comes in and say, hey, I'll take care of this for you. I'll take this responsibility off your shoulders. I'll give you this. I'll give you that. And all you need to do is exactly what I tell you. And, you know, we live in an age today where a huge portion of people go, sure, you know, govern me harder, daddy, rather than, no, leave me alone. Fuck off. I'm fully capable of determining all this shit for myself.
Yeah. And as fiat dies, and hopefully, you know, obviously it's going to be a rough period, but like, hopefully what returns is sustainability of the family, such that, you know, one or both have much more time to be parents. It's a huge thing, especially in those early years. It is a huge thing, because these things all just sort of cycle on top of each other, right? If you grow up in a family and you literally have a nanny, I mean, maybe they care, maybe they don't, or whatever, or you have one parent, or you just have parents that are constantly stressed and distracted. It has just an immeasurable effect. And this is generation after generation after generation. And so it doesn't surprise me that a lot of people are, quote unquote, choosing not to be parents. Yeah, for some people, I get it. You know, I totally get it. But some people are doing it, well, whatever. I can't judge, right? But what I foresee is that we will again realize, oh, this is the thing. Like, you got to have caring, attentive people around these young people. That's everything. You know, you got to be able to hold all of, you know, what they're exploring as they become humans. All of their, you know, desires and all their life force, basically, without shutting it down, or without ignoring it, or without, you know.
Yeah, and that's also like one of the elephants in the room today is like, you look at any culture or society, you know, parts of the US are a great example. And all these social problems, whether it's substance abuse or violence or, you know, whatever, all that kind of stuff. How much of it is, if not probably primarily influenced, but at least greatly influenced by the breakdown of the nuclear family, right? Like no father.
It's everything, John.
The deprivation in the family, all that kind of stuff. Like it's basically that. If you have a strong, stable nuclear family, society is probably more or less doing all right.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have two, like, attentive, you know, aware caregivers, you know, I think I can't judge, you know, but I think it's good to have the balance of the direct energy, quote unquote, of the man, and the more nurturing, you know, wide energy of the woman. Like, I think that balance is really great for children. And again, this might be controversial, but I'll say it. I think it's part of the reason why we're having such issues with the gender stuff and what people identify as, because I think again, I might be wrong. This is just an intuition, right? But I think that when a child doesn't have a stable sort of direct masculine energy supporting them and a stable, nurturing, female energy supporting them, the mix goes, like the balance goes, and sometimes it's in one direction, because I didn't have this, so now I'm all the way in this direction, or I was hurt by this, so I go all the way in the opposite direction. And I think when that balance isn't there, that's why we're seeing so much of, whatever this is. I don't know what it is. I have enormous empathy. But there's a kind of aberration that we're experiencing. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know it's some kind of aberration.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably a component, as is, again, to this theme that we've been discussing around how you constitute yourself based on the signals that are available in the environment and the culture in which you develop. When that is increasingly untethered from, truth in many ways, as I think the fiat system increasingly is, all those signals are less and less grounded in truth. You're living in kind of a somewhat of a make-believe sort of environment, then many things become untethered from a more fundamental truth. Doesn't matter if we're talking about, the realm of religion or economics or one's self-conception, what one thinks one is, all that kind of stuff. Like there's more allowance, there's more space there's less of a necessity of grounding things in whatever form of truth they ought to be grounded in, whether it be logic or reason or biology or the natural world or whatever. Like, it's just doesn't matter. It's all just floating around in this ether, and it's all relative. So, there's no real truth anyways. And, I think that's, one, incredibly destructive to an individual and a society. And two, being turned around by having, the base layer being grounded in the truest truth there is, basically, which is, energy and the realness of that, and the necessity for all things to have and use energy to actualize and to achieve their ends. And, i.e. in Bitcoin, in a way in which to structure society around something like that, I think it will bring us back to the proper reverence or orientation around truth, and not so easily be able to be pushed off of that course.
Yeah. I guess, I guess that's, in some ways that's it. That is maybe always been the function of pain, it's like to course correct.
Sure.
Some kind of pain. I mean, yeah, you match all that with this political climate of, I mean, I'm no political scientist or anything, but like, I'm starting to ask I keep asking those questions, like, well, these people are trying to get these votes. So many, everyone's got a vote, and it's like people are pandering to people for votes, and so many people feel indignant and put upon, and they're lashing out as if they've been wronged, and the people are trying to get those people's votes. It's like, whoa, we're not headed in the right direction. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but this is, I guess, how things kind of reach their horrible conclusion oftentimes, because things don't spiral into better circumstances. They often spiral into worse, and then they have to be reconstructed, right? And this is the problem with the current system we're in, is that it increasingly creates bad outcomes for people. It generates more and more pain, to your point. And that pain is not used to course correct. That pain is actually an impetus for asking for more pain, which is, i.e., asking for the apparatus, political and economic, that created the pain to intervene even more, the result of which is more pain. And it just, and fucking, this is why we Bitcoin, right? Because more and more people are realizing that That doesn't work. That's been tried a million times in a million places. When things get bad and the pitchforks come out and the coup happens and the military dictator takes over and things start up again, and maybe they're cool for a while, and it just always the same bullshit. This hopefully stops or dramatically improves the outcomes of those types of cycles. And, we're always that whole, like, hard men create good times meme. Like, I can't see how that's not always going to be the case, because there will be a certain degree of complacency that comes with things going well. But I don't think we'll shoot ourselves in the foot in the same way, and hopefully not in as bad a way as we currently are. Because, you can see this in, this is the era we're in now. It may be in certain pockets politically, it's not going that way, but I think over the course of time it will. If you look at around it in Latin America over the last year with, the elections of, I think, in like Colombia and Chile and in many of those countries, socialist leaders are being elected because they're promising to resolve the problems that people are facing of poverty and, deprivation of various kinds and violence and that kind of stuff. And, with more government action. Sure, of course, the government should take care of education. Of course, the government should take care of, medicine and housing and this and that and the other thing. And that will resolve your problems. And when you're someone who has nothing and you're literally, you don't know where you're going to get food for tonight's dinner for your family, it's got to be hard not to want to take that bait, not to want to just the immediate solution. Fuck, I don't care what it happens down the road. This motherfucker says he's going to give me more shit. Get him in power so I can get more shit, and this, and why do we so often talk about low time preference in Bitcoin? And again, it is a privilege to be able to talk about it in the way we do in many cases. But why do we? Is because we recognize that the benefits of it. We recognize that that's how you have to be looking at things, especially the most meaningful or important things, and how to turn around or construct them in the best possible way. And it's just, so that's a scenario that we're currently in. And I think will play out, and then it'll continue to get worse in various ways, like we mentioned when we started this thing. But at least Bitcoin is right there running tandem, a little orange dinghy life raft that's like, yo, come on in. Like, you can just, it's pretty easy, like, it's not that hard anymore. It's getting easier all the time. Jump in. It's not a panacea. There's, depending on where you are, lots of shit you're going to have to contend with, but it's a step in the right direction. It can be, it can be a big step in the right direction of helping you at least insulate yourself, just, not broader society, not the political apparatus, not your countrymen and all that kind of stuff, but yourself, so that you can be in a position to make more free decisions. Again, like we were saying earlier, and those are decisions that that's the most important thing, to put yourself in a place where you're making the decisions.
Yeah. It's the emerging sly roundabout way, of our golden age, or whatever. It's like, it's the sly roundabout. And I think it's going to be that way. It's going to, it's going to, the way that we have, I guess, in the last, whatever would be this cycle would be 80, 90 years, and I don't necessarily know about price, because, that's one of the geniuses of this thing is, the baked in greed factor. But I think the cultural shifts, they will be slow and steady. And I'm so optimistic. Like, I get once in a while, I get this sort of feeling of like, people say, well, humans will always be humans. Well, okay. Yeah. But maybe, like, do I dare say this time is different? Like, maybe there is a prolonged, you know what I mean? Like, there could be a prolonged cycle that is a quote unquote, renaissance or a golden age or whatever you want to call it. Like, and that would be amazing. And it would take a lot to displace it. Like, it would take a lot if we get going in the right direction and we keep that momentum. And I think with this thing, we might, and who knows? It could be like, go ahead.
The other constant is, like, we also always change. We were fucking hunter gatherers or cavemen at a certain point. And we're pretty different from that now too. Right. So we should be careful about how much we extrapolate our current state of behavior and consciousness and all that stuff into a future that has an environment that's dramatically different. Because as we've alluded to a number of times here, that will pull out different behaviors, that will amplify certain behaviors and dial down others. And hopefully we'll be in a position to be more conscious about that and be more involved in that process. And to your point, I think that probably will put us in a position where we are able to, if nothing else, extend the periods where things don't go completely off the rails. And that would be good. It's part of the reason why I'm really fascinated with like ancient Egypt and ancient Minoa, and ancient China, India, Indus Valley, et cetera. But particularly those the Minoan civilization, because it's so small. It's just on the island of Crete, really, and it was pretty much contemporaneous with ancient Egypt. So maybe a tiny bit later. So if we say that ancient Egypt started around 3,500 BC officially, then maybe ancient Minoa was like 3,000 BC or 2,500 BC, something like that. But it seemed to be a amazing society, like where there was a lot of peace, a lot of prosperity, rich cultural, like, the art and the fashion and the architecture and all that kind of stuff. Very little signs of implements of war and defense and that stuff. Great, Mediterranean food and all that jazz. And it was just like, seemed like a little mini paradise. And Egypt may be a bit different, especially on like the war and defense sort of front, but still you have a culture which was able to maintain itself for like, I don't know when you want to peg the downfall of Egyptian civilization, whether you want to do it with like, Cleopatra and Mark Antony or in the Ptolemaic period or whatever, but I don't know. Let's just let's just say 3,000 years for easy numbers.
That's a long time.
Yeah. And they maintain a cohesive, vibrant, prosperous culture for that much time. And we can't even, that's 3,000 years is a ridiculous amount of time, especially in the context of human affairs and culture. We can't even conceive of that. I mean, look, British Empire, they had their 100 years. America, maybe they'll have their 100 years. Portugal had their 100 years. Spain had their 100 years. And they were like on top of the world for 3,000 years. And so it's obviously possible. And I think the really juicy, interesting questions is like, what permits that to happen? And I think one of the answers to that, I mean, obviously we both think one of the answers is the money, and in this case, Bitcoin and the type of money. But I also think like there's something else going on there too, right? And in the case of Egypt, like I think it was a highly developed relationship to the domains of value and meaning, religion, broadly speaking, and how highly developed and how relevant and how real that was to the society, such that it oriented it so well that it was able to maintain itself or persist for so long. And surely other factors, fertile valley, lots of food, all that kind of stuff. But even that, I mean, other places have had a lot of that stuff and they haven't been able to establish the same degree of and length of flourishing. And again, there's a lot of variables here, but my only point in bringing it up is like, I think, as we were saying before, there seems to be this resurgence of interest in domains of maximal meaning, let's say, which, again, philosophy, theology, religion, this type of stuff. And I think part of that is both a conscious and subconscious recognition that engaging that territory on an optimized basis is what allows you to optimize individual and collective life. And to the degree that those representations become more and more sophisticated and map with greater fidelity onto a truth that's not readily apparent or that we can't necessarily see, to the degree to which it does that, that probably dictates in large part the degree of success of individual and collective. And perhaps why many of us are starting to turn our attention there, and why I suspect in the future that we're moving into, this aspect of things will become much more work will be devoted to them, and we'll gain a lot more clarity on them. And that will be good. And that will help us hopefully extend the period of good times and stave off the bad times.
Yeah, totally. And so if we go just push into that just a little bit more, like, well, I'll share and then maybe I'll ask you. like up until this point in your life, like, do you have a sense of, um, and I'll answer my own question, but like a sense of like the how to, like, do you have a sense of like now, like what can be done, what can a person done without this becoming prescriptive or whatnot, but a life lived and a certain number of years lived, like I think everyone has some degree of intelligence around it, and I think it's important that those are the kinds of things that get shared, or uh, and I think it's part of the reason why, what you're doing and the conversations you're having, and the way you so eloquently sort of foster them is like a big thing, um, and what I'll say is that there's something about, you said earlier, like you're reading physics, and I said something about like the tingles. There's something about the what I would describe as like a whisper, like a tingle, a whisper, uh, just a slight sort of like thing of being drawn towards something, and if there's nothing, if it's just crickets, if it's just dead air, and people feel, then I think what requires is like almost like a forceful exploration, like to literally launch oneself, literally, but launch oneself into uncomfortable situations, like to go into unknown, uncomfortable places, hopefully with the tether that is like an instinct, like drawn towards it. But if not, something, and I like what Peterson touches on, which is, this thing of like responsibility, because what I can sense and what I've observed from my own experience, and that's all I got really, my own experience, my own life, is that when I undertook the thing that I didn't think I could do, that I doubted I could do, but I wanted to do it, I wanted to try it. When I undertook that, when I took on that challenge, something happened, in well, really, no, not in many ways. And I wasn't really that equipped, in some ways, I wasn't really equipped to do it, but I wanted to try these things. I was drawn to these things. And it's almost like, I think, and it's, humans in general, but especially men, again, I speak as a man. It's like, there's got to be a mountain, like there's got to be something there that we can test ourselves against, or, go try, try to do something. And in the failure, in this, and the success, and the difficulty of it, it's the difficulty of it, I think, that creates some kind of a relationship with something other than ourselves that is powerful, something outside of ourselves. Like I've always had this sort of thought, I guess, about this topic, that if I need it, it will be there. But if I don't need it, fuck off. Like if I'm not in a place in my life, in some situation or some endeavor or some, where I need guidance, quote unquote, help, something higher, some, experience of something greater, if I don't need it, why would it show? And so I think again, this is my own stuff that I'm throwing out there, but I think when we take on that thing that we're not sure we can do it, in fact, we're afraid to do it, that then when we need it, something will come. But if we don't need it, if we're we're playing over here and we get all the rules are simple and everything's, I don't know. I just think it's not as likely to happen. Does that make sense? I'm trying to articulate something that's difficult to articulate, but
no, I thought you did a great job, and it makes perfect sense. And I think it's why the quote unquote hero's journey is the narrative that has dominated human narrative for all of our history. Like that seems to be the rub. And there's been a lot of people throughout time that have both written those narratives, and their salience speaks to how fundamental they are. And then there's been people to explicate them, like Joseph Campbell or Jordan Peterson and these types that, kind of give you a better sense of why they're so important and all the different elements that are involved. But sure, it's like you sense there's something bigger. You sense it's outside of your capability. You embark on the journey anyways. You have a certain degree of faith in doing it. What you end up finding is not necessarily what you set out for. It requires you to, kill or a part of yourself to die so that you can be reborn in a different form that's more capable of accomplishing the task or appreciating the reward. And, this is the cycle of growth. And it makes me think of that quote. I don't know who it's attributed to, but it's something like reality or God will give to you the experiences required for the evolution of your consciousness or something like that. And lots of big terms there, like, what's the evolution of your consciousness and why should it even be, why is that even something to be desired? And maybe that's part of a longer conversation, but it makes sense in a way that, like, if you continue to engage or confront the things that emerge in your path with the same perspective or consciousness, then you're probably always going to regenerate those same things, because you're not maybe necessarily meeting them in the proper way to remove them as an obstacle and get on to something even more fundamental or even more meaningful or even more valuable. And so you'll keep confronting it almost by virtue of the fact that you'll keep inviting it until you find a way to resolve it, to break down that metaphorical wall, to remove that impediment and move to an experience or a challenge that has an even greater reward, or is that even more important for, whatever end you might be pursuing, or an end that you maybe aren't even consciously pursuing, but that would be beneficial to you nonetheless.
Yeah. And I think again, I don't know, I've experienced this to whatever degree, in the years that I've had so far, but like, I think we evolve towards a place of play, like if allowed and if sort of unfettered in a way, like we sort of start off very playful, humans sort of have this inherent sort of, I think kids that are,
totally
haven't been fucked up. They're
but
it's just play, play is just sort of in there. And I think, at some point, when we get really free, we feel the play of it all, and so I think the joy and the play barometer is just a wonderful, I don't know, I guess it is a barometer.
Well, it's such a pragmatic way to frame confronting novelty too, right? Because if it's always framed as like an objective and a necessity, and like, I need to confront this novelty so I can get through it, then you invoke or bring in all like the insecurity. Oh, I'm not capable. I don't have the requisite blah, 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 blah. And it becomes this, like, you're far less efficient at engaging that process. But play is almost a means of tricking yourself into being like, no, I'm just going to roll around in the novelty. And, I'm not going to place that much pressure on myself as I do it. And what inevitably results is some kind of data information acquisition. And so you're scooping up information, you're scooping up data about your environment or whatever, in a way that you're not filtering it with your own sense of inadequacies, for example. And then, maybe subconsciously and consciously, you're able to do more with that data because you've playfully fumbled around in acquiring it, rather than like putting pressure on yourself to acquire it. Maybe this is some kind of evolutionary way that we're able to, despite our proclivities or what's the word, like our
it's like we release our self-importance and there's so much more space or something.
Yeah, something like that. Like, despite the type of person we are, we have that available to us to get information that could be beneficial or useful to us. Now, who knows? I'm way out on a limb. I'm speculating on this shit now, but
no, it's cool. I mean, can I ask you? We're probably getting close to close, but can I ask you? You mentioned physics to begin with, but is there something in your life that's kind of like tingling? I know these conversations are, really meaningful to you, and I think to everyone who has them. So that's been a big thing, and your podcasting has kind of grown a lot. And now you're reading stuff, but do you get a sense? Is there something currently? If you want to answer, go for it.
Yeah, no, I don't mind trying to answer. I mean, it's always reflecting on yourself is one of the hardest things to do, right? Because you're not aware of your own blind spots and biases and stuff. But No, I continue to engage in these types of conversations, probably, well, a lot, and at the exclusion of a lot of other stuff. And I suspect that at some point, anyone who cares to listen is going to kind of become tired of them. But it's because the thing that is tingling me right now is like this subject matter and the piece of writing I'm trying to engage in. It is this, the answer to the question that we've been discussing this whole conversation, which is like, when you get placed in a position of, if not total freedom, greater freedom, and now you're confronted with, what are the ends to which I've established and engaged the means, and what are the things that permit both an individual and a culture to be optimally constituted and oriented for quote unquote success, and what does success even mean? And we have examples like we brought up of ancient Egypt or Minoa, and we brought up examples of rites of passage and different forms of ritual and stuff. And to me, like, and I don't think this has not been intentional for me, but I just seem to be drawn to these fundamental questions, that, and as I try to gain clarity on them, like, obviously many people have grappled with them throughout history. And one of the things I've been enjoying about the use of my time lately is just like how much I've been reading. Like, I've just been reading like a maniac, and I've always been a big reader, but you go through peaks and troughs where you kind of get out of the habit for a while, at least I did. And now, like, I got like 40 books on my Kindle. I'm reading 8 at a time. And it's great to be able to see what other people in different times and different circumstances were thinking about these things. And, if the thesis that we seem to share is true, that like we're on the precipice of a lot of things being fundamentally changed and hopefully upgraded as a result of this monetary, quote unquote monetary upgrade, then what does it look like? And my underlying assumption is that the more clarity we can have, or at least more clarity I can have about its structure, and how to confront and determine and engage meaning and value in these sorts of things, the better life is going to be. Because I think those are the primary determinants of the things that conjure joy and peace and contentness and love and these sorts of things. And so I've just been really enjoying digging into all the different nooks and crannies around that stuff and trying to, and whatever I'm writing is totally for me, as has always been all my stuff. But like, because you know what it's like, your head is a mess, and like, we start up this conversation today, we have no idea what we're going to talk about. We don't talk about it beforehand. It's just blah, like it comes out when it's seeded by a conversation partner.
Yeah.
But I have a faith that there's a more properly structured and articulated set of things in here, and I want to get them out and arrange them properly so that I can see the full picture more clearly. And my faith is that engaging in that is going to deliver a better state of existence, for lack of a better term. And so that has been my motivation in a lot of the work or time I've been using lately. I don't know if that answers your original question. But.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're just towing into it. It's good to hear. You talk a bit about it. It just, when you said that, the thought that came to my mind was how writing can tame the mind. It's almost like it tames it. And it's like,
and it's an alchemical sort of process, because you have to change. Like, you don't realize how unstructured you are, I guess, is maybe one way of putting it. And when you actually have to, it all just makes sense, right? And you're in the shower and you're having a crap and you're having a workout and yeah, sure, it's in there and it's all ordered properly. And, I'm acting rationally and correctly all the time. But when you're actually forced to transmute it out into the quote unquote real world, right? Or at least the physical or phenomenal world, you realize how unorganized it is. And the reason why I say it's alchemical is because, like, the very process of putting it into order, like, necessarily causes you to change. At least that's been my experience. Like, you have to be more patient. You have to have your ego, you have to have a more control over your ego. You have to not just want to have it done as quickly as possible. You have to not just be thinking about the accolades you're going to receive if you write something and it's great and people love it. Like you've got to, all that stuff has to be sorted out so that you can access, you know, the ideas or the insights properly, and you can get them out and you can organize them, and you can do it with full faith to the idea and not whatever the outcome of succeeding in that endeavor is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's go ahead.
I was just gonna, if you didn't have a response to that, I was gonna ask you, so, and we will shut it down in a few minutes, but one of the things that, and this is, you know, we're totally in the realm of speculation, so there's obviously no right answers, but it, you know, I think oftentimes we fail, well, as we've alluded to in this conversation, we tend to extrapolate from the current circumstance, right? This is why it's pretty hard to predict the future, and why movies are, you know, usually don't do a great job at it. And so we think about this renaissance that we've been talking about that will be instigated by Bitcoin. And I'm increasingly curious, what will that really look like? You know, we've discussed here the importance of family and early development, and you know, an orientation towards things of greater meaning and not necessarily the frivolous or material aspects of life. And so in this culture, where highly secular, probably massive state, fiat, et cetera, what we tend to project out into the future as being like the highest ambition for ourselves is like more fanciful technology, whether that's colonies on Mars or, you know, transporters on Earth. But that seems to be the notion of progress. And therefore that seems to be what like our collective ambition is oriented towards. Again, broad brushstrokes, but that's my impression. And so if, you know, what do you think we will be striving for in a culture that has a fundamentally different orientation? I'm just curious to
get your thoughts. It's great. I mean, I love it. I love that. I think there's an inevitability to this thing of like, you know, going out, and I think at least for a sector maybe of the population or a part of the culture, this thing of Mars and out and out and outward. But I think there's also like a chance that we give that a swing and realize that there's no there, you know? And I think it goes back maybe to like part of what we're talking about, which is like we stop looking outward, and we embrace that going inward. And maybe the technology will also go inward, I don't know, but like the human thing to put our attention back on ourselves, on our humanness, on our experience of life itself, and how can we do we play a part in the experience of our own life, and can we, you know, not improve it but enjoy it? Like, can we figure out, you know, can we walk the path so that we really enjoy this experience of being alive, again, without this end goal in mind or whatever? And so I think that and this is a weird, cheesy reference suddenly, but speaking of movies that don't do a good job, and not that this was a good movie or a bad movie, but what was Cameron's movie there with the planet?
Avatar?
Avatar. There was something about the sitting in the group meditation that really resonated with me, you know, around this big tree. It was like there was something about that image that felt really powerful to me. So I think that we will probably go out, you know, again, what the fuck do I know? But go out. We will miss the mark. We will see that there's no there. We'll return, come back, and realize that, and experience the profound joy of a deep relationship to each other, ourselves, and to nature. You know, like that will be, it's what we sprung from, and it's kind of what we are meant to return to in one sort of capacity or another. And I think that you know, the relationship to nature is I think we're going to sort it out, I think. Um, and then this self thing, I think that's emerging. And then this other thing that maybe is more, I don't know. I don't know if it's more complicated. Maybe it is, maybe not. Maybe they're all connected. I think they are all connected. But this idea of how do we relate to one another? And that's my current, it's been for a while. I have yet to sort of implement, I guess, my impulse, but like, yeah, I'm fascinated, drawn. So I love the playfulness of like engaging with other people and all the different ways that one can engage with other people. And let me just provide a little bit of context so that this doesn't sound, but I have so my fiat life, my pre-Bitcoin, my pre-Bitcoin life is like one from like performance, film and television. And, so I trained as an actor, quote unquote, an actor, whatever the fuck that means. But, and it was the most meaningful sort of shift in my life when I sort of underwent this thing that came out of completely left field to try to do this thing, that I didn't think I could do. And then that led me to, classes and people and, teachers and, all this stuff like, it's like going into the gym basically, and trying out a bunch of different gyms. And I came into this, one gym where this, guy was teaching this thing of like how to relate to somebody else, as a means to an end, which was to avail yourself to your own internal landscape and then be able to relate profoundly, deeply with somebody else who's relating to their own internal landscape and be in relation, like he was essentially kind of, and still is kind of teaching this intimacy, like to have profound intimacy, with somebody else. And I've never been able to not want to do it since I sort of was in it, in this thing. And it's like a specific kind of exercise. You sort of go up with one other person and you do this sort of repetition thing. But what I've discovered over the course of a decade is, well, profound sort of insight around the male female dynamic, because, I got to watch people do this over and over again, hundreds and hundreds of times. And then for myself, I started to learn, and I think I've referenced this to you before. And when we had that chat with Pierre, yeah, this experience of discovering all and being able to share and relate with someone else in that capacity, because like, what is lust? I mean, it's in relation, what is cruelty? It's in relation. And so, this is a long-winded thing, and I probably won't get to it, or maybe it's for another time. But like, yeah, I feel like I've stumbled onto this thing, and I don't know how to bring it out to more people. It's this sort of small thing that happens amongst really dedicated people in the performance arts thing, which is its own rabbit hole that I could wax on about. But it's engendered in me like a thirst for profound authenticity and intimacy and play, and also acceptance of all the things that make me up, like, and that's given me enormous peace, because I've actually had the, I guess, good fortune, I think this is how I describe it to myself, of like going over my inner terrain, like, and really going over it and experiencing it and having it in relation to other people in a way that was, for lack of a better term, like safe. And I think the reason why, because I had no history in the performing arts, no family history, it would have been the last thing I ever thought I was going to do growing up. But I think the reason why I was drawn to it is that I wanted to be free of my own shackles, like like I could feel my own kind of shackles in a way. And I wanted to not feel like that. I wanted to feel like I was okay, like that I didn't have, not that drop a big word in there, but like shame, like the shackles of shame, which I think is a very human thing, but like to explore oneself in relation to somebody else in a way that's like profound. It's like, I don't know, shame, like the shame starts to dissolve. It's like I stopped judging all the parts of me. And that has made me, over the course of, a decade plus, like judge others far, far less, because I see that, that's me too. I got that. Oh yeah, I'm like that too. That's in me for sure. That's in me too. I got that. That's, and so I don't go like wrong, wrong. I just go, oh yeah, I got that too. That's me. Oh, I know that about myself. I know that I could, these are the things I'm capable of. And it's a wide spectrum, it's from the dark, what I would say the, very darkest dark to the lightest light. And anyways, I bring all this up just because we were sort of going in that direction of like, what's next, or what are you drawn to? And I'm trying to figure out how I can bring this thing, out. Because it's been such an incredible gift to me. And I can't help but think that it's a human thing that might be an incredible, gift to other people in this realm of like, freedom, I guess, feeling free.
Well, I mean, is not maybe writing about this stuff a decent start in figuring out how to do something with it?
Yeah, maybe.
Like,
maybe.
I mean, again, just to organize and clarify everything that's probably a bit messy in your head. And then, once it's out there on the page, you can determine what to do with it, because again, I mean, this is, I think I understand, well, at least part of what you're trying to say. But I mean, our own capacity to understand ourselves is what dictates our capacity for compassion and empathy with others. Right. And if you truly have that, then you're probably going to be, the edges of your judgment will probably be softened to some degree, right? You certainly can't stop from judging internally, but however you express that and externally is probably going to have more, compassion built in, as it were. And I think that's a good thing. I also think, though, so often, and I'm not in any way saying that this is the case with you or what you want to pursue, because I think further elucidating and exploring that territory is exactly the type of like module that would be in the quote unquote curriculum, even if it's not formalized like that, of developing young people, as we were talking about before. Like these are the things, these are the components that really help someone become a well-adjusted, healthy, capable, responsible individual, not like the history of, European fucking privateering in the Caribbean or something like that,
I agree 100%. Yeah.
Right. And so this should be it. But I do think that in today's world, again, broadly speaking, many exceptions, but like, so, the whole "it's okay to be not okay" thing, like, sure, in a moment, but it's not okay to just accept not being okay forever. There's this fiat, the softness associated with fiat that we maybe often, criticize. I think has to be, one, properly fleshed out, as you just described, and then balanced with like a grit, a harshness, a toughness, like that, as we were saying before, like, the kind of
more forging
aspects of ourselves.
Forging.
Yeah, exactly. And those two things taken together, with many other things, probably, would be helpful in constituting a well-integrated person, and this is that's the rub, right? Being integrated within yourself, being integrated within your family, being integrated within your community, being integrated within the natural environment you're in, being integrated within the broader invisible landscape that somehow influences you, whether we want to call it spirituality or any of that kind of stuff. Like, to the extent, and I do think that's been the enterprise of culture forever. It's like trying to figure out what those integration points are. How do we nestle ourselves within all the different nestled patterns of the seen and unseen reality that we exist in? How do we properly align with all those things? And it seems like if you can do that, you put yourself in the best position possible to have the best experience of life. And to the question that I asked you, you know, about what will we pursue, like it's impossible for me not to think that we're always going to be curious. We're always going to want to push the boundaries. So I'm not saying that I think like space exploration or whatever is going to go away, but I'm recognizing, I think it's fairly rational to assume that when what you value and the things from which you derive meaning, when those change, they change your motivations for behavior. And when your motivations for behavior change, you get different actions and you get different outcomes, of course. And, you know, maybe Egypt is kind of a decent example here, because they seem to have, you know, out of nowhere reached an extremely high level of technological and architectural and spiritual sophistication, and then more or less stayed at that level for several thousand years. And so I wonder if, again, I do think we'll continue to explore the stars, as it were, but I wonder just what we're going to strive for. And when we get certain things in place, are we just going to be like, that's where it should be for now, and we can shift our focus to other things? And do we get to a place where we're kind of like, again, it's impossible. I don't think we're going to stop innovating, but I guess I should just say I'm intrigued by the prospect of what a change in values and principles and you know, the sources of the meaning that we're able to access, when that changes, as it seems potentially to be the case around this new future that we're moving into as a result of Bitcoin. How does it change our notions of what are the best things to strive for, and how motivating they are, and all that kind of stuff? And
Yeah,
definitely no answer, but I think it'll be interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that we're only really going to go so far, you know, outward as we are like able to, you know. And if we go too far and it's not supported by something real, and, you know, something real inside of us, you know, as a species. And this is the thing that I think, you know, you often allude to, this, whatever it is, I don't know, relation to the divine, the meaningfulness, the value. If we don't have that, no matter how far we think we're going to go, it's going to come back down. We're going to come back down. There's just no way to go. You can't go beyond your skis or whatever, you know, like you just, so, yeah. So I think, go ahead.
Sorry. I like, maybe a succinct way of putting it is like, what's ultimately more motivating, your ability to more efficiently or more easily access like the joy and wonder of existence wherever you might be, or a different colored rock on a different planet? Like, and I know that's an oversimplification and some people hate me for it, but I think it kind of speaks to, you know, the difference in motivations between things. Like, and I'm as interested in modern technology and what is happening in other parts of the galaxy and other parts of the universe as anybody else. So I'm not saying I even want this to be the case in the future. It just seems to me more and more, the more I delve into, you know, all these books and thoughts that I've been reading and having, seems to be likely that if we do truly access like if we're more able to apprehend like the realms of meaning, you know, more clearly, let's say, than we have before, you know, we wouldn't call them meaningful if they didn't have a greater motivational attraction, a greater motivational significance. And how will that reorient, you know, what we strive to experience, I guess. Anyways, I think
no, it's great. No, I get it. Yeah. And I think that's what is going on, you know, like this desire to go out, you know, I think it just speaks to the like, you know, again, these human things. I always go back to like these human things. Like, what do I need? What am I trying to fill? What brings me peace and me, you know? And I think for some people, maybe, you know, that reaching out is like to, you know, with the desire, the hope that it'll be the thing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we inevitably realize that, you know, it's actually within me, you know, that it's in me, and I gotta go in me. It's not going to be, you know, on the, the space station. It's going to be back towards me. And yeah, I don't know. I want to share this one thing just because I don't know, it's just tingling in me. But like I did this thing a while back, a number of years back. This is before I was a parent and before I got married. Where I, did a retreat, and it was, yoga, and, it was intense, and meditation, 6 weeks, and, meditating a lot. And, well, I actually have two of those stories. I don't know if we keep going, but maybe in personal, tell the other one, but, yeah, sure. And there was one point, it just started happening. I was waking up at like whatever, 3:30 in the morning, and I couldn't not wake up. I was always waking up at the same time. And I would just sit in silence. And, we use this word meditate or whatever, but, just sitting there in silence. My girlfriend, now wife, was like next to me in bed sleeping, and just quiet, eyes closed, sitting upright. And this would be like 2 hours, it's usually 3:30 to 5:30. And it was like night after night after night after night. And I don't know, just, it's this thing. Right. And then one night, it's like something happened in the quiet, and my experience of it, still to this day, I don't really know. Right. But my experience was like, I was downloading something. Like, that's what it felt like. Like, it felt like I just clicked into something, and it was like, I felt like I was downloading something. And I think, again, I think about it sometimes, just for whatever. And just in this moment, sort of get the sense like, well, maybe it was the downloading was the thing, that the message was the experience, that I was not necessarily what I was downloading, although I downloaded something, and, I wrote it down in this very plain English afterwards. But maybe it was the downloading that was the actual thing, because it was such a profound.
You mean like your felt experience when it was happening? The
felt experience was I was downloading something. It's like,
and have you made,
but just the experience, right? I'll get to like what I downloaded, whatever. But like, I was downloading something. Like, it was just the weirdest. Can't describe it, but I felt like anyways, as you can see, I'm bumbling here. And maybe what I was downloading isn't that important. Maybe it is, I don't know. But the simple message, whatever, or information or whatever, was that the oneness, like the oneness of everything, can only be known, like can only exist because of the separateness, like that all the separateness of everything, it's the only way to know the oneness. Do you know what I mean? And that, totally. So that is why I always stumble when I try to talk to somebody about this thing, because I don't know what, but the thing, the separateness was essential, and so I sort of extrapolate to that, to the, all the ways that things go, quote unquote, wrong, all the malevolence, all of it. It's like somehow it was essential to knowing the oneness of everything. Anyways, again, make of that what you will, but the experience of the download was like,
yeah, no,
I would like to have it again.
I've had, similar experiences and insights. I think, again, in a lot of the literature, if you dig deep enough down, doesn't matter what culture or tradition, you start with the first separation, the first duality, right? Mm-hmm. Night and day, light and black, positive, negative, 1 and 0. And that duality is what gives birth to the world of experience. Mm-hmm. And, it begs the question, why? And either on your own or through an investigation of some of these traditions and writings, the why is often so that you can be the one to determine how you're going to have that experience and which way it's going to go. This goes back to what we were saying about when you have freedom, then you're confronted with both the opportunity and the responsibility to dictate, well, as a force of nature, as an individual, as someone who acts and who creates things, what are my choices going to create? Like, what am I going to participate in creating? More good or more bad, broadly end of the poll speaking. And it also kind of goes back to what we're saying about, childbirth and that like state of absolute dependence, as being almost like the first separation. And then you go through life and you try to relieve that dependence so that you can kind of reconnect to, to use the term you just used, to the oneness. How do you reattain that type of liberation that maybe it was a state you were in prior to being born, or maybe, who knows? But I certainly, what you just described is certainly concepts that both myself and, from what I can tell, many others have wrestled with before and come to them in both similar and different forms, in the kind of revelatory download aspect of things, or just through quiet contemplation, or through, whatever. I mean, seems to be many ways to skin this cat, to get that download. But, and this is, the idea of revelation is obviously represented in so many different traditions as well. And, it's, I think we ascribe, more importance to some people's revelations throughout history. And I can't see too much of a logical basis for doing that, but, it happens, and maybe it's just meant to be context for your own, right? And to help you, understand and engage and legitimize your own should and when it occurs, so that you can use it most optimally, so that you can contend or grapple or integrate it with most effectively, and not just be like, well, that was fucking weird, onto the, wake up the next day and kind of forget about it. These things are probably very meaningful, and that they happen so consistently and to so many different people would seem to suggest that there's something fundamental about them. But, this is why we have these types of discussions, and why people write about this shit, is because not only are they so common, historically speaking, but they seem to be so meaningful, right? Like it's not like you had an itch and you just scratched it and now it's gone. It's like this thing.
Yeah, no, I can feel it. I mean, I can even feel it in my,
Right.
I can feel it in myself. Just I kind of have a bashfulness, about even talking about it with you. There's a kind of like, it's and it's very personal, and it's
bashfulness because you're like, I can't do it justice. I'm kind of degrading the experience by articulating it, or
yeah,
trying to.
yeah. And then it's so personal and meaningful to me that I don't think I could ever,
right.
I could try, I guess, but to describe that experience is just hard to do. And but it has resonated in me since, and so, yeah, maybe, this time we get is just our opportunity, our opportunity to be on that whatever that sort of path is, to whatever extent we can, and discover what, I guess, discover what we can, but experience what we can.
Yeah, I agree. What's the meaning of life, and how do we live it out? Basically. It occurs to me now that when you messaged me a few days ago, you said you had a vein you wanted to tap. I'm assuming we've at least partially addressed it, or was there something else you wanted to get off your chest before we shut it down?
No, not at all. I mean, it's like, I mean, you have this unique thing that you talk to people, and I listen to your conversations, and this has happened to me a number of times. And I DM'd Gigi with this, which was like, I feel like I know you guys, like, and it's a weird thing to say, but like, I feel this weird thing of like, I know you. And so, what the fuck? God calling. But and so this is, again, I'm going to botch the articulation of this. Jesus. What am I trying to say? It's like, and this is probably common, right? This is probably a common Can you, somebody answer that? It's amazing. John, hang on. This is live for you here. Hello? Yeah. Hello? Hey, can I call you back? Thanks. Okay, awesome. I'm actually on podcast with John. What a what a great what a great stumble. See if I can get through the chaos. Yeah, no, it's a weird phenomenon to like feel like, you know, I feel lucky to listen to, you know, certain people, especially in the space, like talk about stuff, and it's a weird thing to go, I just get that. I get that. I know that person. And so when, you know, I've reached out to a few times, and I just feel like, you know, I look forward to the day we get to meet in person and, you know, hash out in person and all the stuff that might come of it. But it's just a weird feeling to have that, you know, someone that you don't know. And,
yeah,
you know, there is something about this Bitcoin thing, you know, that it's hard to describe it, but there's something about it. It's this undertone, you know. I've tried to tweet about it, but it just doesn't, you know.
Well, I get it all the time. Like I feel I when I go to, you know, the last two Bitcoin conferences or like dinners and stuff, I mean, I think it's partially because it's clear that Bitcoin has certain values in it, right? Like, let's just say two obvious ones that I bring up all the time are truth and freedom, right? It's a verifiable form of incorruptible truth, and it permits a certain degree of freedom that perhaps was never available before. And like, these are values that obviously have application and representation in many other areas of life. And so like, if you're drawn to them and if you value them, I think you're already coming onto a similar wavelength. Well, it maybe the better way to put it is like that, to use somewhat metaphorical language, has a certain frequency, right? And people that are dialed into that frequency, they end up aligning with it. And just by virtue of that, other people that you encounter have done the same, you're kind of already on a similar frequency. And then, you know, then you get to figure out on what other ways you may be, you know, jiving or thinking in a similar way. And this, you know, I joked about it in a recent piece I wrote, which was like, you go to a conference and someone comes up to you, you don't recognize them at all, but then they tell you their Twitter handle, and you're like, massive hug immediately. Like, as you say, like, you feel like you know this person intimately, and then you just, you know, you get on with it, you hang out, you chat, you laugh, you cry, like all that normal stuff. And I mean, this is why people call it a cult, of course, but it's a pretty amazing thing that this convergence over certain paramount values, or around certain paramount values, seems to be occurring. And by virtue of that, and I think it's always the case, whether it's like a romantic relationship or a friendship, like if you line up on what you deem to be the most important values, then the rest is relatively insignificant if it's not like celebrated and a point of interest, right? The challenge is if you don't line up on the same values, then it's unlikely you're going to have a good friendship, you're going to be able to empathize with the person, you're going to have the romantic relationship or any of that stuff. But if you do, I mean, of course, it breaks down, it fosters the formation of genuine relationships very quickly, it seems.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, the rest is just beauty, just gravy, juicy. It just, you know, it just becomes so easy. So I have yet to do it in person and go, you know, hit a comp, and
someday.
Yeah, I'm going to come out of the shell here, maybe start with some meetups and then just go from there. But
yeah, you should do that. There's meetups around where you're at, aren't there?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, that's step one.
Step one, baby.
Well, man, I'll let you call back whoever was calling you and get on with your day.
Classic.
Always great to chat, and I'm sure we'll do it again sometime in the future.
Sounds good, brother. Take good care.